Here at Rockwell Automation's World Headquarters, research has been proceeding to develop a line of automation products that establishes new standards for quality, technological leadership, and operating excellence. With customer success as our primary focus, work has been proceeding on the crudely conceived idea of an instrument that would not only provide inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal gram meters. Such an instrument, comprised of Dodge gears and bearings, Reliant electric motors, Allen Bradley controls, and all monitored by Rockwell software, is Rockwell Automation's retroencabulator. Now basically, the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it's produced by the modial interaction of magneto-reluctance and capacitive diractance. The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fam.
Clearly, in this video, the language is not plain or easily accessible to the general public.
Lunar wane shaft, that side fumbling was effectively prevented.
But shouldn't the facts speak for themselves?
The main winding was of the normal Lotus O deltoid type placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator.
Shouldn't it be obvious that the retroencabulator has numerous benefits, providing inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detectors? And let's not forget the fact that it has Dodge gears and hydrocoptic Mars bearings. And who can be without hydrocoptic Mars bearings? Welcome to CU Science Update. I'm your host, Angus Bohanon. You're probably thinking that this Rockwell Automation video from 1997 is just a load of gibberish, but it demonstrates the disconnect between scientists, their research, and the public at large. Actually, the video is simply a gag, which has its origins as far back as 1942, when the turboencabulator was featured as a joke in a technical pamphlet. Even if this machine were real, there are some people who would say that its presentation wouldn't be much different.
It's available soon, wherever Rockwell Automation products are sold.
Randy Olson would know. A former tenured marine biologist turned filmmaker, Randy attended many scientific presentations, which he considered to be the dullest, most uninspiring presentations that he's ever seen. The inability for scientists to make their research accessible in plain language to the general public is a problem that Olson wrote about in his book, Don't Be Such a Scientist, where he writes about the difference between talking science and science communication. We know that the general public benefits from the diffusion of knowledge, and that scientists benefit from greater public awareness of science. A recent study conducted by the Superior Council for Scientific Research in Spain observes that a majority of scientists feel that communicating with the public is part of their obligations, but many of them also say that such communication is not part of their job description. They have other responsibilities, such as teaching, research, raising funds for more research, committee duties, lab, and field work. Communication is often done on their own time. But communication to the general public seems to be the one thing that many scientists have difficulty wrapping their heads around. Except for Carl Sagan, an astronomer, astrochemist, author, and producer of the hit 1980 PBS series Cosmos, Sagan was a master science communicator. He found a way to bridge that gap between science and society using language that was easy to understand. As a result, Sagan made science cool.
Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a fourth physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those three directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a fourth physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a four-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in three dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in three dimensions of a four-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's two nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in four dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So you see, while we cannot imagine the world of four dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well.
William Poundstone's biography of the late Carl Sagan says that he acted so vigorously in his efforts to communicate and popularize science that his friends wondered when he had time to sleep. What Sagan understood is the power of telling a good story, to engage the public and explain science in a way that anyone without a scientific background could understand. Others, like Randy Olson, have followed Sagan's lead. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michio Kaku, and Brian Cox, among other scientists, know how to craft words that convey scientific concepts to a lay audience. Unfortunately for most scientists, the only means they have to communicate their findings are through scientific journals, which are completely ineffective to the general public or with the media. Simply, the majority of the public don't read or have access to scientific journals because they often require subscriptions or membership in some kind of science organization. Even if they could get access, these journals are so heavily jargoned that the public would have trouble understanding the science. Instead, most people learn about the world of science through third parties in magazines, television, newspapers, and the internet, which can sometimes lead to a misrepresentation of facts. However, one person has made it her cause to give the public access to information that comes straight from the scientific community. Her name is Vivian Siegel, a scientist with a PhD in genetics who founded the Center for Science Communication at Vanderbilt University. In just a few years, the CSC has become a unique resource offering workshops and seminars to help scientists make their work more engaging. Siegel is also the founding editor-in-chief of Disease Models and Mechanisms and the founding executive director of the Public Library of Science, a nonprofit organization committed to making the world's scientific and medical literature free and accessible to the public. She recently attended CU's 63rd Annual Conference on World Affairs, and we are delighted that Vivian Siegel could join us in our studios, where she met briefly with our correspondent, Rachel Dubrovin.
When I got to Vanderbilt, I had agreed to launch a new journal. That journal's called Disease Models and Mechanisms. It's about using basic science approaches such as genetic experiments done in model organisms like mice or zebrafish to understand the underlying pathobiological mechanisms of disease, but also to identify and test potential new therapies and diagnostics.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Center for Science Communication?
So the role of the center is multifold. It's about bringing the work of publishing scientific research back into an academic setting. So a lot of what I do is still around editing scientific journals, which I'd done professionally for about a dozen years before I came to Vanderbilt. And so we bring in editorial business, and DMM, Disease Models and Mechanisms, is one example of that. But it's also about helping scientists learn how to communicate their research effectively, to interact with scientific editors and get their work published more easily, and to then communicate their science to people interested that are in the public. It's also about helping scientists who might have interest in other careers. So there are quite a few of them who enter graduate school interested in science, but think they might prefer science writing or working at a scientific journal, to give them opportunities and with internships to see if that's really the right choice for them to make.
That's awesome. Are you the creator of Disease Models and Mechanisms?
I am.
What inspired you to create that?
Well, I would say I started the journal, but the idea was actually the idea of two friends of mine who were directors at a British charity called the Company of Biologists, and they are basic scientists who work with the model organism Drosophila melanogaster, or the fruit fly, which I'm sure you've seen wandering around your kitchen from time to time. And they had noticed that their work was taking them into areas that were much more relevant to human health than they had predicted, and saw a lot of work happening there. And also noticed at the time that there really weren't very many places that were trying to bring together researchers who were trying to do that work without a medical school background, and clinicians who really understood the disease in a way that they could talk to each other. And I had launched a lot of journals already by that point, and I wasn't really interested in just doing another one for its own sake. I wanted to, I look for projects that I think will help society or help scientists in some way. And I thought this journal could really benefit all the communities that are interested in advancing human health, because there's a lot of work going on here and not very many avenues to communicate that.
At C Science Update, we try and communicate science to the public and promote science literacy. So do you have any tips or tricks for that you use to communicate science to just general public or the undergrads?
I think, and one of the ways that I try to teach scientists to help speaking with the public is to help them recognize that they don't need really special words to describe what they're doing. So we're actually about to launch what I call a kind of lunchbox series, where we bring scientists together with communications students to actually get them to talk about their work, and the charge of the students is to get them to talk about it in a way that the students can understand, because the hope is if students can understand what the scientists are doing, then they can communicate that to the public. I think there are some great divides, and some of it is language, and some of it is a fear that you won't be able to understand science because it's too complicated. And I think one way, I remember when I was running the Public Library of Science, which is a nonprofit organization that's about getting the results of research accessible to the public, I used to interview anyone who was a good candidate for a job there. And anyone who was a scientist looking for an editorial position had read the science that we had published. And anyone who was looking for any other position looked at everything else we had on the website, but didn't read the science we had published. And one of the things we'd worked really hard at was making that science accessible by creating a plain language version of what the science was about, trying to connect it to human health and basic biology, which we might know. And yet they didn't actually even bother to look. There was a sense that I could never understand. And so I think everyone has to be a bit braver, and more curious, and willing to say, I don't understand that, and not just say I'm stupid, until people learn how to say things in ways that others can understand and appreciate. There's been a large move in funding research that has pushed people towards research that has obvious relevance to human health. Now, I run a journal in which the goal of the journal is to publish articles that we can understand their connection to human health. So I say this kind of recognizing that I'm in many ways, I don't know if I'm promoting the problem, but I'm trying to highlight work that does this. I think there's a problem with that because I think it's pushing funding away from basic science that where you don't know what the results will be. And I would, I haven't done the studies to prove it, but there are a lot of discoveries that come out of the blue. They really come not from, I know what's going to happen, I'm going to do experiments to prove it, but from someone looking at a study and being really perplexed and surprised at how it turned out. And it's those surprises and those things that it doesn't fit the way I thought biology worked or this disease worked that really kind of lead to those big open discoveries. And so I think if I were to leave, this room with one thing to say, it's to kind of recognize how important it is to let researchers follow their curiosity and not to worry too much about it leading to a cure for some disease tomorrow, that many of those things that are the most important will come out from where you don't expect them.
While more direct communication between scientists and the public will help improve our understanding of science, there is still a huge lack of public involvement in science. Most Americans probably couldn't name any of the major government science agencies, such as the National Institute for Health or the National Science Foundation. In addition, there are many who simply don't believe in well-established and undisputed scientific principles such as evolution, the safety of childhood vaccines, and the human influence on climate change. Unfortunately, anyone with a website can say anything they want and call it a fact, which makes it more challenging for the public to sift through all that information to determine what's accurate and truthful. The effort put forth by people like Vivian Siegel could be a catalyst for a more efficient diffusion of scientific knowledge in our society, which has benefited tremendously from the innovations of science. That's it for this edition of CU Science Update. More to follow as we continue our series with participants from CU's Conference on World Affairs, so keep watching this space. In the meantime, you can find other episodes of CU Science Update on iTunes or at our website, cuscienceupdate.com. And don't forget to like us on our Facebook page, where you can find posts of some of the latest news about science. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.